Welcome back to the podcast. My guest today is Marian Giannulis. She is a member of the Trout Unlimited administrative staff. Anchorage. You're based out of Anchorage, correct?
Yes.
And you were born and raised in Eagle River.
hmm
And so how do you like it up there? And also welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm excited to be here. I couldn't imagine myself living any other place. I'm incredibly fortunate to be born in a beautiful place and to have, a uniquely Alaskan childhood like only this incredible place can provide. And just my childhood here really is what got me into conservation and the work I do now. So grateful for that life experience for sure.
When did your family move up?
Well, my mom is a third generation Alaskan, and my dad immigrated from Greece,
Oh,
hence the difficult last name that you did a great job pronouncing.
thanks.
So my parents met in the 80s and then have been here ever since.
Huh. Excellent. Yeah, it's interesting to see how or why people ended up in Alaska. My parents came up in the 80s because that was kind of the blank check era for teaching. They moved up as teachers, and my
hmm
brother and I were old enough to where you move to Prince of Wales Island. It's going to be rural, it's going to be remote, but we were young enough to not have roots in Colorado, so it wasn't like they were taking us out of high school or anything. But we were old enough to
hmm
not be annoying on the trip. So, well, I was probably annoying because I was 5. But yeah, teaching, jobs, adventure, like there's always a unique story because it's not on the way to anywhere.
I
It's definitely a
know.
destination.
Yeah, it's a far-flung place for a Greek immigrant to land, but much like your parents, just the oil boom and the economic boom of the 80s drew a lot of people north.
Yeah. Along with the booms, a lot of Alaska has had resource type booms, which has led to a lot of, I guess boom and bust cycles, but kind of at the expense of some of the resources, the natural resources. And it's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Growing up in Prince of Wales, I was very familiar with logging, very familiar with the need for logging and how it drove the economy. And
hmm
I didn't really have an appreciation for like the whole ecosystem and the importance of spawning habitat. I was just this kid that would ride my bike to the river and I would fish, and I didn't like catching trout. I wanted to catch salmon. So like a rainbow trout or a cutthroat trout was just, yeah, I don't really care about that thing. Give me a 10-pound
Oh,
coho. So
hmm
at what point did you start to, I guess, I don't know, care? Sometimes we love fishing, but
yeah.
there's a difference between caring about the ecosystem. So did you grow up fishing, and then when did you really start to dive into the ecosystem?
I did a little fishing growing up, but not a lot. And then it was really in my late teens, I started dating my husband, and he taught me how to fly fish, and that was what like really hooked fishing for me. I was like, okay, this is the kind of fishing that I want to be doing. And with his education in fly fishing, like it came really heavily with a lot of that ecosystem element because his father is a fisheries biologist, retired now, but worked for the state for about 25 years, and his brother is a fisheries biologist, currently employed by Fish and Game out of Fairbanks, and he's a civil engineer who designs Fish Passage. So for me, when I was learning how to fly fish, I was learning so much about the work that uh, my father-in-law had done and my brother-in-law currently does, and so it's a really kind of unique introduction to that world. Simultaneously like the ecosystem elements that you need to be successful with fishing, and then the technique itself.
Mhm. So how did you decide to make that somewhat of a career? What was your educational background when you went to undergrad and then college?
So I got a degree in English,
Nice.
and I just knew like I wanted to do something good for my community. I just wanted to work in the nonprofit sector with an organization that was just bettering the lives of, the people around me. And I graduated with my degree, worked in public broadcasting, and worked for Providence, the nonprofit healthcare system in Anchorage for a while, doing marketing and comms. And just through that period of my life, I was really happy with the work that I was doing, but my personal passions just lied in the outdoors. And I was, recreating outside anytime I got the chance, primarily fishing. And I just, it's interesting as an Alaska kid, I think you don't really realize how special the environment is that you grew up in until you get older and you start to experience other parts of the world, and you see that, like, this is a very unique thing. And what makes it so unique and so special is that we still have these intact wildlands and spaces, and connected rivers with clean water and healthy habitat that are like producing these fish populations that support the wildlife populations that draw visitors from all over the world. And so I was realizing more and more that if I wanted to continue to enjoy that, and if I wanted those elements of Alaska that I love so much and are so like life-giving for me to be around for the next generations, I needed to be a part of the work to conserve it. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking for conservation jobs, and this position with Trout Unlimited opened up. It was the first one that I saw and applied for, and it was truly a dream come true, because it wasn't just conservation, it was fisheries conservation. So it was perfectly aligning like my personal passion of fishing with the work that I wanted to do professionally. And, I joke that I can never leave this job because I'm not going to care about anything else as much as I do this. So I'll be sticking it out for a while, but there's a lot of work to do. It keeps us busy for sure.
Yeah. My first introduction to, I guess, the idea of conservationist was people who were anti-logging. And so since a bunch of my friends were, their parents were loggers, as a little kid, you don't understand nuance. And so I just thought, oh, these people don't want people to log because they don't realize that we need logs. And as I got older and more mature, I realized, oh, okay, conservation is not like an anti-development thing. It's a responsible use of things. And if we don't have conservation, we're going to lose everything. And being in California after I graduated college, I wanted to fish, and the only way that I could fish legally in a lot of these spots was to fly fish. That's how I learned how to fly fish, because you'd have certain areas of the river that it was a single hook barbless, and other areas where you could use bait, other areas you could use a treble hook. So it was just really confusing. So I figured the only way that I know I can be legal anywhere I want to fish is to fly fish. And then I just started seeing the dams, and I started seeing like a lone king salmon. And I thought, wow, there's a king salmon here. This is wild. This is in California. I don't know if there's many of those left. And then I remember my favorite creek that was, well, actually it wasn't favorite, but it was kind of the most accessible creek that we did a lot of fishing on. The water was raised, and the whatever was left of the king salmon were coming up there to spawn. And then the power company dropped the level of the water to a point where the reds were totally exposed, and so all the remaining king salmon that managed to spawn, all those eggs just went dry. And I started thinking, this is the nuanced understanding of conservation and how we have to work together, because it's amazing that there's anything left in places like California, given the population, given all that stuff. And so I'm happy to say that I've definitely matured in my definition of conservation, and definitely much more motivated now living back in Alaska to understand how good I had it growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, it's the recognition too in this work is there, as humans, we need developed spaces, we need power, we need water. But how are we, moving within the landscapes that we reside in a way that is, the best harmony possible with the ecosystem? And how are we avoiding these landscapes that are really, really high value to wild creatures that maybe, we don't need to, build a mine in this specific location because it is the most prolific, wild salmon fishery that's on the planet. And so, the work that Trout Unlimited does is to, identify those really high value areas and work to conserve them, as well as some of the restoration work that we're going to talk about today. But it is balance, and there's a lot of shades of gray in conservation. It's something that we are all, working to figure out and define.
So anytime that you're developing near a river or a tributary, there's going to be some sort of impact. So I don't know, maybe is mining more destructive than logging, or because logging has been such wide scale across the state? Like, how does the damage, or how do those two compare?
Yeah, well, a lot of that depends on the type of practices too, right? So, a lot of the projects that Trout Unlimited is involved with are looking at historic impacts. So, placer mining in the early 20th century that just totally destroyed a stream bed and totally, like removed all sinuosity from the river, turned it into a straight shot channel. That is one of, probably the most negative impacts that development can have on a stream. And then, in Southeast, before there were stream buffers and clear cuts went all the way down to the edge of salmon streams, that had a ton of negative impacts as well. But there have been evolutions in practices to turn, necessary development in some areas into, just less damaging effects on those ecosystems. And yeah,
I think
they're
the logging, if you log too close to the river, then you get more sunlight, and so it increases the temperature and the oxygen. Is that somewhat reasonable? Does that make sense? Is that true, or am I just making up facts here?
Yeah, well, I mean, riparian vegetation does a lot of really important things. So first of all, it stabilizes the bank, and that maintains water quality. The woody debris that naturally falls into the stream is really important structure where fish can hide. The organic matter from vegetation that falls into the stream, it feeds, invertebrates who feed fish. So it's really a necessary food web for all of the organisms in the stream. And so a lot of the restoration work that we do, can be some of the major channel work, but, it can also be as simple as planting some native plants along a stream and reestablishing that native vegetation that is such an important function of the stream.
Hmm. I saw that on the Russian River, and that was my wife and I when we were up there for our honeymoon a couple years ago. I didn't really want to go to the Russian River. I wanted to see it, but just knowing how many people were up there to fish, that just wasn't my idea of a great time. Especially, I guess the Reds were a little bit late that year, but so we went anyway, and it was incredible to look at the difference in the banks. The erosion on the far bank that was just from people sitting and walking, it just completely had what was bare, and then the side
Mm-hmm.
where there had been restoration, there's the planks that you have to walk on, and people were complaining about, you couldn't just get down everywhere you wanted. You had to kind of wait for the stairs to go down. But it made a lot of sense that you have to have that sort of habitat and structure because young fish have to survive, and they need that the food, and they need that habitat. Otherwise, there's not going to be a run of fish later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, there are a lot of salmon who are spawning in that stream, and without that important riparian vegetation, the overall health of the stream and fish populations would definitely suffer. And the Russian is an incredible example of how, some restoration efforts like the light penetrating walkways that protect the vegetation underneath, and the replanting some of those native species can rebound incredibly. Because if you look at photos of that area, from the 90s before that effort happened, it's just kind of astonishing to see how naked it is. And it's kind of scary to think about, if that work hadn't been done, what would those stream banks look like now? How could just the overall like health of the stream, and then subsequently fish populations suffered from that degradation.
Hmm. Is there a river that you kind of like because it's not as damaged, it's a little bit more pure, and do you kind of seek those out? Obviously, there are the big name rivers where you get the big fish and you get all that excitement, but do you tend to kind of
Mm-hmm.
look for more of the maybe smaller fish, but some of those rivers that are more untouched?
Yeah, definitely. And I just any Anchorage resident can't deny the draw of the Kenai River. One of the most incredible like sport fishing rivers in the country. Just 2 hours south of us, and so I do spend a fair amount of time fishing the Kenai. But my heart is really in the Susitna Valley, where you can get into some of the smaller streams, and certainly there's streams up there that definitely do get a good amount of pressure, especially along the highway and downstream of the highway. But there's also some of the ones, or maybe upstream of some of the highway bridges, where you're going to be doing some bushwhacking to get out there, or maybe it's not as popular. And I would definitely rather spend my day fishing a smaller stream, with some fun structure to navigate around, some really like feisty and healthy fish. I think as anglers who do catch and release, when you see negative impacts on the fish that you're catching from being caught too many times, that really hurts your heart, and it doesn't feel good to catch a rainbow that has its jaw partially ripped off, or maybe its eye got poked out. And so being able to get out a little bit further to an area that has less pressure, fish who've been caught fewer times, is a lot of fun, and definitely my preference.
Yeah, I saw that a lot when my wife and I were fishing the Miracle Mile down in Wyoming. It's only a couple miles, but it's between these two dams, and there's so many fish, and some large ones too, large rainbows and large brown trout. But because it's such a popular stretch, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if we caught one fish that didn't have some sort of damage, and some of it was just brutal. Um,
Yeah.
if you get something in past the barb and then it's taken out pretty haphazardly, there was one that just kind of had like an infection. It just looked like it was kind of swollen up and it turned into a big sore. And that's something that I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't, thought a ton about when you're in fly fishing only sections and you're fishing some pretty delicate stuff. And, you don't see a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that, but fish that are just hammered and they can't, you're stuck between two dams. Yeah, that was kind of a shocking, kind of a horrible feeling. You feel bad for these fish
Yeah.
because they can't trust anything that they see. Because, well, last time this was a hook, and this time it was food. But I guess they have
Yeah.
short memories outside of knowing where to spawn. So maybe that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why you pinch your barbs, for sure.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So as far as some of the other issues that you have up there specifically, we talked a little bit about the Russian River.
Mm-hmm.
What is kind of the big project that you're working on right now, or what's something that's pretty important?
Well, we've got several, and it's really a great time to be doing fish habitat restoration work, because there were two really large investments, the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law and 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, that just brought really a once in a generation investments for restoration. So a lot of money is funded to federal agencies to do that work, but as they're scaling up, they need quite a few partners, and they are administrating many grants. So Trout Unlimited is a partner in a lot of different restoration projects currently. And there's a lot of work to be done across Alaska. I think there is a myth of abundance a bit in our state, and people don't understand the scope of impacts to our fish habitat. And they think like, my freezer's full, I can, go and catch trout here. So the state of salmon is good. And, we don't need this work, but the reality is that we have a lot of different areas in the state that do have really impacted fish habitat. We have, historic mining practices that straightened whole river channels and disconnected floodplains and removed crucial substrate that fish need for spawning. We have clear-cut logging that has removed streamside vegetation. Hydropower projects blocked off entire rivers. And then something that is really ubiquitous around the state and has a lot of cumulative impacts is just fish passage culverts that don't allow fish migration. So those are underneath roads, driveways. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game monitors the culverts statewide, and they have a system where they deem pipes that impede or block fish passage as a red pipe. And currently they have 1,300 red pipes.
Wow.
Counted as red that impede or block fish passage. And that's 41% of the ones that they monitor. So we have a lot of restoration work to cut out for us. We're working in several different areas of the state to address fish habitat impacts, both from historic mining, clear-cut logging, and then also road building as well.
Mm-hmm. When I was up in Anchorage a couple of weeks ago, in the front page, I was reading about the Eklutna Dam. Yeah, Eklutna? How do you pronounce that?
Eklutna.
Eklutna.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this is, I guess, in the last few days, king salmon has been closed. That's kind of like an annual type thing in some of those rivers that, there's not going to be a king salmon fishing river. Even though that river was dammed in, was it 1955 or something like that?
Yeah.
It's dried up a 12-mile section of this river that used to have king salmon habitat. Am I getting that kind of right?
Yeah. So it had all 5 species of Pacific salmon that we have in Alaska, and it had Dolly Varden. And the river was first dammed about mid-river in 1929. And then the upper dam, which is the dam that is currently diverting all the water out of the river, was the one that was built in 1955. And the lower Eklutna Dam was removed in 2018, but that upper dam still diverts all water out of the river. It was once, thriving salmon habitat, and now you actually still see some really resilient fish trying to move up there. And there's a tributary creek, Thunderbird Creek, that flows into the river. So when you're like traveling over the Glen Highway and you're seeing water flowing through the Eklutna River, that is all coming from that tributary. And so they still will see salmon moving up into the system to spawn, but they can't get much further than above the Thunderbird Creek tributary because there's just no water flowing through it.
And that's both hydroelectric and drinking water, or is it just one or the other?
It's both. So currently all water is diverted. 90% of that is for power, and then 10% of that is for Anchorage's drinking water. So about 90% of that water that's diverted it converts to about like less than 3% of the total electricity generated by Matanuska Electric Association and Chugach Electric Association. And Trout Unlimited has been part of a coalition of partners, including the Native Village of Eklutna, the Conservation Fund, and the Alaska Center, who has been advocating for the return of water and salmon to the river. And this hydropower project is pretty interesting. So it was purchased by the utility companies who currently own and operate it in 1991. And as part of that purchase agreement, there is language that requires the operators to come up with a plan that protects and mitigates damages to and enhances fish and wildlife that were negatively impacted by, the damming of the river and the removal of all the water. So we're actually at a really crucial point in that process where the hydroelectric operators have released their draft fish and wildlife plan for the river to, make up for and mitigate some of the damages. And we just had a public comment period, and then that draft plan is going to be delivered to the governor this spring, who will then sign off on it. So the Eklutna River Restoration Coalition has been advocating for continuous flow of water, fish passage into the lake, and enough water to support salmon populations for several years now. But the draft plan that was released by the utilities this fall didn't accomplish any of that. And it's been, a lot of work to let the public know that this is a really important river for Alaskans. It's king salmon river in Upper Cook Inlet, and they need all the habitat they can get. But also, the plan that was released by the operators is going to cost ratepayers money. So it's really important for people to know that we have the opportunity to return a salmon producing river, and a abundant salmon producing river back to, the greater Anchorage area. And the plan that the utility operators put forth will not do that, and it will still cost ratepayers $57 million.
Wow. So people who might not understand might think, okay, well, I'm in Anchorage. I need electricity. I need drinking water. Like, are there alternatives? Is there really a good, reasonable way to restore the habitat, but also have power and water coming from this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Eklutna Lake is a naturally occurring lake. It's not just a reservoir. So the intake pipe for drinking water for Anchorage is really deep in the lake. So we do not need to dam the lake to provide drinking water to Anchorage. The 3% of electricity, I think it kind of fluctuates between 2 and 3% that it provides, could be sourced from other renewable energy sources. And our coalition recognizes the importance of having renewable energy sources, but, you can't claim to have a power source be renewable and clean if it's decimating native species like this project has done. And we would love to see some, renewable energy sources that aren't having such vast negative impacts to the ecosystems around them.
So the swap has been spawning ground for salmon for 3% of the electricity needed for Anchorage, because the lake supplies the water without needing to be dammed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and this river supplied a major food source for the native village of Eklutna. And the native village of Eklutna is at at the bottom of the river where it flows into Cook Inlet, and they've developed their village there because of the food source. And nobody from the native village of Eklutna was consulted when the original dam was built in 1929, and nobody consulted them when the upper dam was built in 1955, and they are honored as a member of the agreement, but their voice is not heard enough to or respected. Their wishes aren't respected as a voting member for the plan. So they have been calling for the return of water and salmon to the river, and if the plan that the utilities put forth is signed into law by the governor and enacted, then the native village of Eklutna will continue to see their namesake river suffer. And to just get into the specifics of what this plan is. So the historic flows of Eklutna River were over 1,000 CFS. Bankfull flows were about 1,400 CFS. The draft plan that the utilities put forth is 40 CFS for peak summer flows. So that would return less than 3% of historic flows. And their draft plan also, and this is a really critical piece, it instead of releasing water from the dam at the outlet of the lake, it routes water through a pipe that is owned and operated by Anchorage Wastewater and Utility under the river for over a mile, and then releases it through that pipe. So it leaves a mile of the Eklutna River itself dry, and it doesn't allow fish to access the lakes or the upstream tributaries. And if we are going to return sockeye salmon to this river, they need the lake for rearing habitat, and the best coho and chinook spawning areas are upstream of the lake. So the plan put forth by the utilities still blocks access to about 65% of the salmon habitat in the system. It would only release a trickle of water. How many salmon are going to be living and spawning in a creek that's 40 CFS? That's not a river. That's maybe
it's a hose.
A feeder tributary. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that plan would still cost ratepayers $57 million. And in the public comment period that we just had, 80% of people who commented don't support the plan put forth by the utilities. Most of those commenters want to see water the length of the river and fish passage, and quite a few called for just complete dam removal.
Yeah, the dam removal's been getting some positive momentum down south. The utilities, the hydroelectric power is being replaced in a lot of areas, and so you have these dams that are just existing there that they don't really provide anything. They're just kind of there. So I think the idea that you need to dam rivers because you need the hydroelectric power, there's A, alternatives, and there's B, some of these dams aren't even doing anything. There's a dam down here on Ward Creek that I thought was being used for power, and I find out it's not being used for power, and it had never been used for power. And I thought, whoa. So I'm fishing this river in town, but it's like a third of it is what it used to be, or it's a third of what it used to be because it's dammed at Connell Lake. And then all that habitat north of or upstream of Connell Lake for sockeye, for steelhead, for salmon, all that stuff is blocked off, and this dam doesn't even have a purpose. So, yeah, I think people are becoming a lot more aware of some of that and how this stuff we don't have to. It's not a one or the other. It's not we go back to days of candlelight or save the fish. It's we can kind of do both.
Yeah, and there really is a growing trend across the lower 48 to remove dams, and Trout Unlimited is a national organization. We have our Alaska program with Alaska-based staff here, but we also have staff all over the West Coast, really has a national presence, quite a bit in the Midwest and East Coast as well. We've been really involved in some very successful dam removal projects. So one of the most recent ones is on the Elwha River in Washington, and it's been incredible to see how species have rebounded. That's a steelhead river and a salmon river, and they've seen steelhead populations rise. And this year, actually, one of the indigenous tribes there was able to fish for coho in their river for the first time. And gosh, I don't even know how long. And that was really powerful to see. These fish are incredibly resilient. Like, you take these dams out, you put water back in their habitat, and they come back, they show up. And in the lower 48, where, there's a lot of, listed salmon species and steelhead or endangered, and they've dammed up most of their habitat, they're seeing how negative those impacts are and working to right those wrongs. And removing the Eklutna Dam and restoring that river is a great opportunity for Alaska to do that as well.
Yeah, I think the idea that once the fish are gone, they're gone is something that some people kind of accept, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I read somewhere or dreamed it, but one of the rivers that was completely decimated when the Mount St. Helens erupted, like steelhead are going back up that river, which is totally wild, recolonizing that river. And then again, this may have been a
Mm-hmm.
dream or maybe I made it up, but even like the LA River had like fry where something was showing up or something was happening there. And so there were thoughts of, if you get rid of that just culvert river, that there might be some resiliency possible down there. So it's, as much as
Mm-hmm.
we offend these fish, if we give them habitat, there's a chance that they could come back. Maybe not go back to what it was in the 1800s, but there's still a chance, if as long as we're good stewards of the habitat.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that on the Eklutna. So for part of the mitigation efforts, it's been a multi-year process where the operators did several years of field studies, and part of that was releasing water from the dam, so allowing water to flow continuously down the river. And that was, the first time since 1929, since the lower dam was built. And when they released that water, they were seeing salmon further up in the system than they had before, because as soon as that water's back, the fish show up and the fish start utilizing the habitat. And so the value of restoration work is certainly a big investment. And when it comes to projects like Eklutna, there's considerations of how are we going to source this power from other places, but it can be done. It can be done for incredible benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just did a quick Google search so that I'm not totally off the rails here, just making up stuff. I have some sort of journalistic ethic, but there is a plan to restore areas of the LA River near downtown. The
Uh-huh.
article says improving river access for endangered steelhead. So, possibility of improving the habitat and see if they come back there. So, as of now, nothing is going up there. It's just so my listeners didn't think that I was out of my mind. But
Yeah, and another pretty incredible dam removal project in California is the Klamath, and
yeah,
Trout Unlimited has been very involved with that as well. And they just started to tear down those dams this year, and it's gonna like reconnect and reopen habitat for like more than 400 miles for salmon and steelhead.
yeah, I fished that river a little bit when I was living down there, and actually when I moved up to Alaska, I was driving north and I was hitting all these rivers and fished the Klamath like right underneath I-5 and caught some
Mm-hmm.
trout. But yeah, there was always people guiding, and there was some steelhead runs there. But I'm not sure what the name of that dam is, but yeah, the Klamath is an awesome river, and it's not so far gone that I think there's going to be some pretty drastic improvement or pretty quick improvement, which is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I believe it's the largest dam removal effort in U.S. history.
That's awesome. That's
Hmm.
great. What else you got going on? There's Resurrection Creek.
Hmm.
What's that project?
Yeah, so Resurrection Creek flows past the town of Hope, so just about 90 minutes south of Anchorage. And Hope was established in the early 20th century because of gold. Is the historic placer mining that drew miners to that area, and that same mining, totally changed Resurrection Creek. It totally removed it from its natural state. It straightened the river channel. It removed, the naturally occurring sinuosity that rivers had. It removed important salmon spawning gravel. It's significantly reduced like critical spawning and rearing areas that salmon need, and disconnected the river from the floodplain. And it's on Forest Service lands. It's part of Chugach National Forest. And the Forest Service went in 2002. They had been seeing the extensive damage that still remained, and they knew it was an important stream. It has Chinook, coho, pink and chum salmon, as well as rainbow trout and dolly varden. And again, just having Chinook habitat in the south central area in Cook Inlet is really important, as those that species just sees declines across the board. So in 2002, the Forest Service went in and they restored about a 1.1 mile stretch of the creek, a bit upstream of the Resurrection Pass trailhead in Hope. So when they went in there, they dug out new stream channels. They reconnected the river to the floodplain. They constructed new pools where fish can rest. They created side channels and ponds. They installed logs and root wads in the new stream channels, and then they revegetated the riparian areas. So, all restoration work is, it can take a variety of forms, but it's all, under the premise of bringing these streams back to their natural state as close as possible. Mm-hmm. So, all of that work is critical functions of the stream to be, healthy fish habitat. And they saw incredible success from the first phase of that project. Mm-hmm. In the first year after it was completed, they observed 6 times as many Chinook in the restored area, just 1 year post-restoration. In the years past, pink and chum salmon have also become more abundant. And then there's some benefits, some kind of surprising benefits for other wildlife beyond fish that they saw. And, right away they were noticing a lot more ducks resting in the side pools of the creek. And moose and their calves were able to cross the creek again safely. So full grown adult moose can cross that creek no problem, but they can't take young calves across. And so that was, restricting their range and making them more vulnerable to predators. And post-restoration, they were seeing moose and their calves being able to freely cross the creek again. So it was a very successful project for the Forest Service. They were really excited with the results that they saw. And that was just a portion of the creek that had been restored, and they still had a lot of work to do. So they had phase two routed that they wanted to start restoring. It's a 2.2 mile segment of the creek that is downstream of phase one. And, the Forest Service started to look into getting that project off the ground, and it just stalled for several years. It didn't have funding. And in 2001, Trout Unlimited and Kinross Alaska, which is actually, mining company, we formed the Alaska Abandoned Mine Restoration Initiative. So we joined forces to invest in projects that restore abandoned mines back to healthy fish habitat. And the Resurrection Creek project was the first project in that initiative. So Kinross came in and brought in influx of private funding, which allowed us to leverage quite a bit of additional federal funding, because a lot of the federal funding for restoration like this requires a match. And so having, Kinross make that investment really allowed us to get a lot of other funding for the project. It got it off the ground. And now TU and Kinross are working in partnership with the Forest Service and with the National Forest Foundation and Hope Mining Company, who has claims in the area of Resurrection Creek. We're all partnering together to restore that 2.2 mile segment of Resurrection Creek. And that also includes 74 acres of surrounding riparian habitat. So currently that surrounding habitat has really high tailings piles, because when they were, straightening out the channel, they were removing a lot of rock and piling it up. And so that completely disconnects the creek from the floodplain, and has, some pretty extensive damage in the riparian areas. And so now we're getting in there, and it's actually a really cool project to see happening in real life, because the main channel work for this project is taking a super straight river channel and digging a new one that meanders around it, and then watering those new meanders. And so I got to go down last summer and witness the watering of the new meander, and it's pretty incredible to see a backhoe, dumping fill into a channel and just redirecting all the water into a new meander. And in a couple of years, what was a super straight channel of river without any, areas where fish can rest or areas where fish could spawn or rear is going to be, healthy and productive fish habitat once more.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about these projects, if someone is a Trout Unlimited member, they have the sticker, they have the calendar, they got the return labels for envelopes. But is it possible to become part of these things if you can't run a backhoe? Can you sign up, or how do you get connected to some of these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to find out what we have going on is just to follow us on social media, Trout Unlimited Alaska on Facebook and Instagram. But one of the great things about restoration is there are, small acts like planting native species on the stream bank, and up to really large acts of, using equipment to dig a whole new channel. And some of our restoration projects have actually used quite a bit of volunteer help to revegetate native species along stream banks. And so we'll have volunteer days where people can come out and help us plant. And last summer we had two, actually, one on Montana Creek in Talkeetna, and then one also on Montana Creek, but the Montana Creek in Juneau, where we had volunteers come out and help us plant native species. And on Montana Creek in Juneau, they installed a new bridge along the like angler access trail and the running and the biking trail that goes alongside the creek. So there's actually a lot of opportunities to get involved with restoration. And I don't know if we're going to be able to have a planting day on Resurrection Creek this year, but definitely next year we're going to have some people get out and help us plant some native species in that restoration corridor. Once the new channel has been dug and the floodplain has been reconnected, and we bring in some topsoil.
That's great. So, kind of in closing here, what would you say to recommend to people who kind of want to get involved, or people who don't know if they should get involved? What would be your pitch to get involved, either with Trout Unlimited or just kind of caring about and voting for salmon?
Yeah, well, I'd say getting involved can look like a lot of different things. You can come out and volunteer on a stream planting day, or it could be advocating for good projects when they do happen, or speaking out against bad projects. And it's so crucial for Alaskans to be involved in determining the future health of our rivers, because if we sit idly by, there's a lot of proposed changes in a lot of areas that it's really important for people to have a voice in. So I'd say just stay informed and pay attention when the land managers in your area, whether it's Forest Service, like you're definitely familiar with in Southeast, or BLM, or the operators of the Eklutna Electric Project, are asking for you to comment on their actions that will determine the future health of the river. Just get involved, and staying connected with an organization like Trout Unlimited, who's involved a lot in a lot of that work, is one of the best ways to do so too. So you can be informed of those opportunities, because there's a lot going on all across the state, and it can be hard to keep track.
Yeah. So you can access Alaska stuff at, was it tu.org, and just click to find Alaska, or is there a separate website for Alaska's Trout Unlimited?
Yeah, so you can tu.org and find us on there, and then really social media is a great way to stay connected too. So Trout Unlimited Alaska on Facebook and Instagram.
Excellent. Well, anything else to add here before we close up?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to just quickly make a plug for some restoration projects that are happening down in your neck of the woods. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the restoration projects that we have going on the Tongass National Forest. So TU is working with several partners on both Kuyu Island and in Yakutat to replace some of those bad culverts that I had talked about earlier that really block access for fish to get into some important spawning and rearing habitat. So this summer we'll be digging into the earth and replacing several culverts on tributaries of the Seatuck in Yakutat that will open up 3.5 miles of upstream habitat for salmon and steelhead and coastal cutthroats and dollies. And then it'll open up 1.2 miles of upstream habitat for coho-chum pinks and dollies and coastal cutties on Kuyu Island. So maybe if you're traveling around on your teacher summer and you want to come see some restoration action, you can come check it out.
Yeah, I'd love to. That's one of the nice things about the interiors, that you being on the road system, you can access these areas. Down here in Southeast, we're kind of at the mercy of the ferry system, or it's a little more expensive to try. But man, there's so many great rivers that are accessible only by boat, or flying up to Juneau and then going to the Montana Creek. But yeah, it'd be a lot of fun to. I should probably save some money. That's always the problem. Every summer with a teacher without work, it's just I could spend money so many different ways with all this free time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. But thanks a lot. Really appreciate coming on here. It's both uplifting and inspiring, but also kind of sad and tragic. But
Well, let's focus on it being uplifting and inspiring. I wish that there wasn't the need for restoration like this across the state, but the fact that we have the opportunity to invest, in our salmon and trout streams is pretty incredible. And then just the resiliency of these species, that we can do this work and we can see the benefits from fish populations right away, is it's incredibly inspiring.
yeah, it's great when you can look at things that we could do and ways that we can help and kind of bring back. If everyone's talking about, returns aren't being what they are, except for Sockeyes had a couple good years, but then
Mm-hmm.
getting around some of these dam issues and some of these utilities, and especially when it
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense. It's not like we would have to completely invent something else new. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're so close. Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
the frustrating part.
Yeah, and I'll say, as we see declines in our salmon populations, there's a lot of different factors that are contributing to that. But one thing that we do know is that if we're going to set these species up for success, they need to have full access to their native range of habitat, and that diversity of habitat will really help bolster their populations into the future. So that is a lot of what restoration is doing, is making sure that these fish that come back to their native streams have places to spawn and rear, and can access the full range of their spawning habitat when they do return. And so that's what we're working to do.
Great. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate you being on here. Very informative, and we'll be in touch. And hopefully, I can book some plane tickets to go have some fun digging around. I'm not qualified to use a backhoe or any sort of heavy machinery, but I can borrow a shovel.
Well, I look forward to seeing you on a gravel bar sometime, Jeff.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.